My wife used to say I was a professional listener of the dead. She meant it as a joke, mostly. My work is in xenolinguistics and digital archaeology. I find the patterns in the noise. It's quiet, methodical work. The kind of work you can lose yourself in for years, which I suppose I did after Eleanor died. So when the encrypted summons came from the Deep Space Network, it felt like being pulled from a deep trench into the blinding sun. A Space Force guardian, no older than my nephew, escorted me from the landing strip to the core of the high desert communications complex. The HDCC is one of 3 major nerve endings the DSN uses to listen to the universe, a collection of white buildings and massive radio dishes pointed at the sky like cupped ears. It's a civilian facility, but encased in a military shell. Scientists and soldiers sharing the same hallways, one group looking for answers, the other for threats. The tension is baked into the concrete. The Guardian left me outside a door with a keypad and a retinal scanner. The sign simply read, SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It's a government acronym for a windowless room where curiosity goes to die. The door clicked open, and Colonel Robert Morrison stood there, looking like a man who hadn't slept since the last ice age. His Space Force uniform was crisp, but his eyes were worn down. He was the commander of this place, the final word on any physical response. He nodded me in. Dr. Page, thank you for coming. The room was cold and smelled of filtered air. It was Morrison's world, not mine. Seated at the long conference table was Deputy Director Evelyn Hayes, the civilian overseer from the interagency task force that holds NASA's leash. She wore a perfectly tailored grey suit, a splash of colour against the room's oppressive beige. Her expression was one of careful, practiced neutrality. She was the one who had to manage the fallout, the politics, the budgets. She was the system itself, in human form. Julian, she said, let's not waste time. Morrison gestured to the large monitor on the far wall. 4 days ago, we confirmed a non-terrestrial object of significant size in a stable solar orbit, using the sun as a gravity shield. We sent a standard greeting, a tight beam transmission, simple prime numbers, the basics. He paused, his eyes fixed on the screen. 16 hours ago, we received this in reply. He tapped a key, and a simple line of white text appeared. It had been translated, stripped of its original alien context and rendered into English. Be silent, it will hear you. That's it, Morrison said. They sent that message across every frequency, blasted it with so much power it must have drained their reserves. Then they went dark, colder than a rock. He turned from the screen to face me. So, Doctor, what the hell am I looking at? Is it a warning, a threat, a bluff? He was asking for a target, for something he could aim at. It's a text, and we're missing the entire book. Who is it? What does here mean in this context? Is it auditory? Is it a spectrum analysis, a gravity distortion? We don't have enough information to treat this as a strategic problem, Colonel. We have to treat it as a linguistic one. Deputy Director Hayes shifted in her chair, a small, precise movement that drew all the energy in the room toward her. Dr. Page, she began, her tone like ice. Your file is very impressive, but we are not in an academic seminar. She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. Your predecessor on Project Phoenix also spoke of context. He was a brilliant man just like you, and his context turned out to be a previously unknown type of binary pulsar. That mistake, his premature certainty, set American radio astronomy back a decade and nearly shuttered the entire SETI program. I knew the story. The Phoenix signal was the great cautionary tale. The signal that cried wolf. Hayes's eyes were locked on mine, and there was no warmth in them. A second object is now accelerating toward our system at an incomprehensible speed. Colonel Morrison needs actionable intelligence. He does not need a novel. Your job is to verify the origin and integrity of this primary message. Confirm it isn't some kind of solar echo or a malfunction. Nothing more. We will verify the facts before we chase a narrative. Hayes dismissed me with a nod. Your access is to the Signal Analysis Center, and you're assigned lodging. Nowhere else. Keep us appraised of your verification. I walked out of the SCIF and into the controlled chaos of the Signal Analysis Center. The SAC was my world. A tiered room, dominated by a wall of screens displaying waterfalls of data from the 70-meter dish outside, DSS-14, the ear. This was a library where the books were written in static and light. I found an empty console and logged in. The raw signal data from the ship was waiting for me. First, I did what Hayes asked. I ran the standard integrity checks, the boring but necessary work of verifying the message. The signal was clean, powerful, and structurally sound. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a directed, high-energy broadcast from a technologically advanced source. I typed up a brief, formal report confirming the signal's authenticity and sent it to Hayes' secure inbox. A closed loop, a completed task. Now I could do my real work. I pulled the signal back up, but this time I didn't look at it as a single event. I looked at it the way an archaeologist looks at a patch of disturbed earth. I brought up my own software, a proprietary suite I'd been developing for a decade. It's called Scribe. It's a tool for finding the layers in things. Most signals are like a clean sheet of paper with a message written on it. But sometimes, if you look close enough, you can see the indentations of a message that was written on the page above it. And sometimes, if you have the right tools, you can see the faded ink of a message that was erased from the page itself long ago. That's a palimpsest. My scribe looks for the ghosts in the ink. I let the program run, and the main screen resolved into a visual representation of the signal's data structure. The warning, "Be silent, it will hear you," was a bright, burning white line at the very top, a perfectly straight road paved over a shattered landscape. But beneath it, Scribe started painting a different picture. It rendered the background noise not as random static, but as a vast, complex architecture in ruins. Structures of corrupted code, fractured data packets, entire libraries of information compressed and then shattered by some immense energy event. This was informational scar tissue. The warning was the last coherent thought of a dying mind, screamed out as the body, the civilization itself, was being destroyed. And the wreckage of that mind was still there, fused into the background noise of their final broadcast. I was looking at a tombstone, and the entire history of the dead was etched on it in letters I couldn't yet read. I called for Morrison and Hayes. This time, they came to me. They stood behind my chair, two figures of rigid authority in my sanctuary of abstract thought. "Director, Colonel," I said, turning to face them. I gestured to the main screen where the Scribe software was still rendering the architecture. "My initial verification is complete. The signal is authentic, but it's not the whole story. The warning is just the top layer of a palimpsest. Look." I highlighted the brilliant white line of the warning. "This part is clean, focused. It was the last thing sent. But the rest of it, all this..." I swept my hand across the vast, ruined landscape beneath the line. "This is the ghost of a much, much larger data package. An archive, maybe. It's been catastrophically corrupted. Our refugee ship didn't just send a warning. It sent us its corpse." Hayes crossed her arms. "Dr. Page, I gave you a clear directive. Verify the primary signal. You've done that. What you are showing me now is noise. You're interpreting patterns in static." "It's not noise," I insisted. "It's history. It's context. Everything we need to understand what's coming at us is probably right here, in these ruins. And you expect my team to start digging through a ghost story while a very real object is closing in on us?" Colonel Morrison's voice was gravelly with impatience. "I need to know what that thing is. What are its weapon capabilities, its speed and maneuverability limitations? Can you pull any of that from your ruins, Doctor?" I looked from his frustrated face to the screen of fractured data. "Not yet," I admitted. It would be like trying to reconstruct a library from a single handful of ash. It will take time. Time is the one thing you don't have, Morrison shot back. Hayes stepped forward, her voice dropping, sharp and final. This is precisely the kind of speculative tangent that led to the Phoenix disaster, Julian. Chasing shadows. Your mandate has not changed. Focus your efforts on the primary signal. Extract any further meaning you can from the explicit message itself. Do not waste DSN resources on this digital archaeology. Is that understood? It was. Perfectly. They saw a dangerous distraction. I saw the only answer that mattered. They left me there, the order hanging in the air. The order was a wall. But my entire career has been about finding the cracks in walls. I acknowledged Hayes' directive with a compliant email, a few lines of bureaucratic smoke confirming I would narrow my focus. Then I went back to the ruins. I worked through the facility's night cycle, fueled by black tea from a thermos. The SAC emptied out, leaving just me. This was how I'd spent the last 7 years since the accident, staring at a different kind of ruin. The hard drive on Eleanor's laptop had been shattered, but a forensics tech had recovered a single heavily corrupted image file of us from our last trip. For years, I had been trying to piece it back together, writing code to find the patterns in the noise, to reconstruct her smile from a chaos of broken pixels. It was an impossible, obsessive task, my own private palimpsest. I applied the same tools now, the same desperate patience. I told Scribe to ignore syntax, to ignore the idea of words altogether. I was looking for something more fundamental, grammar. The rules of a language are the rules of the mind that created it. I was looking for a schematic of the machine that sent it. For hours, there was nothing but silt. Then I found a pattern. A recurring symbolic relationship, a kind of conceptual rhyme buried deep in the corrupted data. It wasn't a word, but a cluster of associated ideas. One concept, let's call it query, always appeared next to another, signature. And that pair was always linked to a third, potential. It was a simple three-part structure, a fundamental rule of their worldview. Query, signature, potential. I kept digging. I found another rule, a different cluster of concepts that always appeared together. Verify, output, threshold. Again and again, that same precise structure, like finding the same distinctive fracture pattern in 100 different pieces of shattered pottery. The process felt less like translation and more like assembling a machine in the dark. I didn't know what the final machine was for, but I was starting to understand how the gears fit together. Scribe's conceptual cartography function began to build a map of a thought process. It looked like a circuit diagram, an unthinking, unfeeling, logical process. Then I found the connection. The linchpin. The threshold concept from the second rule was defined by the potential concept in the first. It all clicked into place. A single, horrifyingly clear line of code from a million-year-old program. It described a process, an automated protocol. First, query a system for a specific energy signature that indicates a high technological potential. If that signature's output crosses a certain threshold, the system is flagged for verification. It was a diagnostic, an automated compliance check. The approaching object wasn't coming to fight us. It was coming to run a test. And the test wasn't looking for our armies, our cities, or our leaders. A machine that thinks like this wouldn't care about biology or politics. It would care about the clearest, most unambiguous evidence of technology that has crossed its threshold. It would look for the source of the broadcast we sent. It would look for the power that feeds the machine. I pulled up a global map on a secondary screen. I overlaid the planet's primary energy grid, the massive hydroelectric dams, the sprawling nuclear power stations, the continental network of high-tension lines. The grid. That was the signature. That was the target of the verification scan. I typed out a new message, addressing it to Morrison, Hayes, and a handful of the senior astrophysics staff. It was concise, stripped of all my usual linguistic caveats. This couldn't be a theory, it had to be a statement of fact. Subject: trajectory prediction for unidentified object. All parties, based on a structural analysis of residual data within the refugee signal, I have determined the approaching object is not a weaponized platform, but an automated surveyor. Its protocol is to verify the source of our broadcast by analyzing our civilization's energy infrastructure. I predict it will ignore all conventional military and civilian targets. It will not scan for life or atmospheric composition. It will execute a series of targeted high-velocity passes to perform a close-range scan of our planet's primary power generation and distribution network. Its flight path will be dictated by the locations of facilities like the Palo Verde Generating Station, the Three Gorges Dam, and the European Supergrid. This behavior will be observable within the next 12 to 24 hours. I signed it, Dr. Julian Page. I paused for a moment, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was it. The ghost in my machine against their entire worldview. If I was wrong, my career was over, and I would be locked out of this facility before the sun came up. If I was right, they would finally have to listen. My email was met with immediate silence. For the next 10 hours, no one spoke to me. My clearance was still active, my access to the data uninterrupted, but I was clearly on administrative ice. I was a problem to be dealt with after the immediate crisis had passed. I used the time to refine my analysis, to dig deeper into the corrupted archive, trying to find anything that would corroborate my prediction. I found nothing but more questions, more fragmented rules from a dead and orderly mind. The call came just after 0300. A summons, back to the SCIF. The atmosphere was even colder than before. Morrison stood rigid by the main display. Hayes was in her usual seat, her hands folded, a perfect statue of institutional patience. There was a new person in the room, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a restless energy that seemed barely contained. She was introduced as Dr. Jennifer Wilson, a theoretical physicist brought in from MIT. She was the one they called when the universe stopped following the rules. "The object has crossed the orbital plane of Neptune," Morrison said. "It is now in our solar system. Dr. Wilson has been analyzing its energy signature and flight characteristics." Jennifer Wilson stepped up to the monitor. She had the brisk, focused confidence of an academic at the top of her field. "What we are tracking is a physical impossibility," she began, her voice crisp and clear with no room for ambiguity. "Its acceleration is not a product of propulsion. There is no plume, no thermal signature, no detectable drive field. It isn't flying in any conventional sense." She brought up a series of complex models on the screen, diagrams of warped space-time. "The object is manipulating space-time itself. It's creating a localized contraction of space in front of it and an expansion behind it. An Alcubierre-style warp, but without the exotic matter and prohibitive energy requirements our models deem necessary. It's not moving through space. It's pulling its destination toward it. It's a perversion of general relativity. The physics are elegant, terrifying, and about 1,000,000 years ahead of us." She was the voice of pure, empirical dread. She made the monster real in a way that Morrison's military jargon and Hayes's procedural caution never could. She gave it a mechanism. Hayes turned her attention to me. "Thank you, Doctor. A sobering analysis, which brings us to a competing theory." She gestured towards me. "Dr. Page, whose work is in a less empirical field, has made a prediction based on what he calls linguistic patterns. He believes this object will ignore us and scan our power grid." Jennifer Wilson turned her gaze on me. It was intensely analytical, like a microscope examining a new specimen. "I've read your memo, Dr. Page," she said. "Your interpretation is elegant, but correlation is not causation. I am tracking a physical object with a measurable mass and an energy output that could boil an ocean. I will confine my analysis to that until the data suggests otherwise." She turned back to the main screen, bringing up a trajectory plot. Based on the most efficient path to a primary observation point, my models predict the object will proceed to a stable Lagrange point between the Earth and the Moon. It's the most logical position to conduct a comprehensive planetary scan. Hayes gave a small nod. She had her expert, her verifiable data. She had her pulsar, and I was the ghost hunter. Colonel Morrison will proceed with contingency planning based on Dr. Wilson's models, Hayes stated. Dr. Page, your access will be maintained for now. Continue to analyze the primary signal as instructed. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my work. There was no point. My theory wasn't born of physics or math they could verify. It was born of an echo from a dead civilization. The data will speak for itself, I said into the silence. The object will follow its rules, not ours. Jennifer Wilson looked at me, a flicker of pity or academic curiosity in her eyes. Then she turned back to her numbers, her work already done. I went back to my console in the SAC. Dozens of analysts sat at their stations, all of them preparing for an event at a place I knew the object would never go. They were calculating intercept windows for the Earth-Moon Lagrange point, running threat assessments. I felt like a man watching a train schedule, knowing the tracks had been torn up a mile down the line. I kept two screens open. On the left, the raw telemetry from the object, a single bright dot moving against the star field. On the right, the conceptual map Scribe had built. My logic against theirs. Hours passed. The object crossed the orbit of Mars. In the SAC, a low murmur rippled through the analysts. According to Jennifer's models, it should have made a minor course correction, perhaps a slight deceleration to begin settling into its approach vector. It did neither. It blew past Mars's orbital path without a flicker of deviation, like a bullet passing a feather. I saw Jennifer across the room frown at her screen. Another hour. It was now well inside the asteroid belt. The tension in the room thickened. This was the point of no return. Its next move would define everything. I watched the telemetry, my hand resting on my mouse. The vector line on the main display, the one projecting its path to the Lagrange point, flashed red and then vanished. A new solid white line appeared in its place, a new trajectory, a sharp, brutal turn. It was aiming for Earth. A wave of controlled panic swept the room. Voices rose. Morrison's voice cut through it from the command tier. "Report. What is that new vector?" An analyst called out, his voice tight. "Sir, it's a high-velocity, low-altitude pass. Initial target, Arizona." I brought up the energy grid map on my main screen. The object's projected path laid itself over the map like a scalpel. It was a perfect line, aimed directly at the heart of the Palo Verde generating station. The object executed the maneuver with the passionless precision of a machine. There was no orbital insertion or atmospheric entry burn. It sliced into the upper atmosphere at a speed that should have turned it into plasma, warped space-time its shield. On the satellite feeds, we saw a flash, a distortion in the air, a momentary ripple in the light over the Arizona desert. Then it was gone, back in space, already adjusting its course. "Next pass initializing," another analyst said. "Trajectory, Central China." Three Gorges Dam. It happened again. A flash, a distortion. And again, over Europe, tracing the spine of their supergrid. It was performing the scan exactly as the alien grammar had dictated. It was reading the signature, verifying the potential, confirming the threshold had been crossed. The math was a eulogy. In the stunned silence that followed the final pass, I felt a presence behind me. It was Jennifer Wilson. Her eyes were fixed on my screen, on the scribe diagram of alien logic sitting next to the now completed trajectory of the object. The path of the surveyor was a perfect physical manifestation of my abstract linguistic map. She pointed a finger at the screen. It altered its trajectory, toward the Palo Verde power station. It's mapping the grid. Just as you said. She finally turned to look at me, her brilliant mind grappling with a new, terrifying variable. Your grammar predicted the physics. My God. Before I could answer, Colonel Morrison was on the internal line. Costello, get down to engineering. I want you to run a direct power conduit to Dr. Page's console. Give him priority access to the primary array. I don't care what protocols you have to bypass. Do it now. He paused, and his next words were clearly meant for me. Dr. Page, you have my full attention. Tell me what happens next. Heads turned toward my console. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit, his name tag reading Costello, appeared at my side as if summoned from the floor itself. He was the head of engineering, a man who spoke the language of cryogenic pumps and waveguides. Colonel's orders, he grunted. You're about to get your own private line to the ear. Don't fry it. He got to work, pulling up floor panels and running thick, shielded cables. The physical act of it, the clicks of the tools, the scent of hot electronics, made Morrison's command real. It was a transfer of power, measured in volts and bandwidth. Jennifer was still standing behind me, her gaze flipping between my screen and the main display where the surveyor, its work done, was now pulling away from Earth at the same unprecedented speed. How? She asked. It's a machine. How did you know it's mined? I don't, I said, looking at the alien logic map on my screen. But I'm starting to understand its grammar. It's not a mind. It's an instruction set. Morrison summoned the three of us to the SCIF. Costello was left to finish his work, fortifying my console into the new heart of the facility. When the SCIF door closed, the air felt different. We weren't a commander, an expert, and a pariah anymore. We were a council of war. Deputy Director Hayes was conspicuously absent. Morrison didn't sit. He paced in front of the main screen, which now showed a schematic of the solar system with the surveyor's exit vector slicing through it. You were right, he said. He stopped and looked at me. 10 years ago, in Kandahar, I trusted a different kind of perfect intelligence, a predictive algorithm that was supposed to tell us where the enemy would be. My gut told me it was wrong, but the data was flawless. I followed the data. We hit a wedding. I lost 2 of my men and killed 17 civilians, including 6 children. That taught me the difference between a theory and a fact. Dr. Wilson's model was a perfect theory. Your prediction, Doctor, became a verifiable fact. That is the only currency I trade in now. Jennifer spoke up, her role now clearly defined as the bridge between my world and his. Colonel, it's not that my models were wrong. They were incomplete. I was modeling an object. Dr. Page was modeling a protocol. His linguistics, it's the operational physics of the system. It's a blueprint for its behavior. So, what's the next line on the blueprint? Morrison asked. This was the moment the validation curdled into pure dread. The surveyor's task is complete. It has confirmed we've crossed their threshold. It's transmitting its findings back to its point of origin. Think of it as a courier delivering a death sentence. The next step in the protocol isn't an attack. It's an administrative action. I walked to the screen, pulling up the rudimentary logic map from my scribe. I've found more fragments of the grammar. The next stage is quarantine. The system that sent the surveyor, the hub, for lack of a better term, will move to the edge of our system. Its function will be to isolate us, to prevent the contamination from spreading. Isolate us how? Jennifer asked. A shield? A blockade? I don't think so. The grammar doesn't suggest building anything. It suggests changing something. It will change the local environment to make escape impossible. Morrison's face was grim. And Director Hayes? She sees your prediction as a statistical anomaly, he said, a note of disgust in his voice. A lucky guess. She's already filing a report recommending we quarantine your data. She believes you are a rogue variable who is causing operational panic. He stopped pacing and faced us. Which is why, as of this moment, the 3 of us are a black project. Dr. Wilson, you will be my scientific advisor. You will translate Dr. Page's findings into physical models. Dr. Page, you will have every resource I can get you, under the table or otherwise. Your only job is to read that goddamn library of ghosts and tell us how to survive. We are operating outside the chain of command. We are all that stands between a procedural report and whatever is coming next. For 2 months, we lived in a bubble of paranoid focus. Morrison became a phantom, managing the official duties of the HDCC by day while funneling resources to us by night. Spare processing power, direct satellite feeds, extra rations. They'd appear without a word, supplied by Costello, our silent quartermaster. Hayes fought us with memos and procedural roadblocks. Morrison would find a way around them, burying our work under layers of classified sub-projects, a bureaucratic shell game to keep her blind. Jennifer moved her workstation next to mine. Our desks became a small island of organized chaos. Her side was covered in physical models of quantum foam and gravitic wave projections. My side was a tangle of historical charts and scribes' conceptual maps. We learned to speak a new language, a hybrid of xenolinguistics and theoretical physics. I'd find a new rule in the ruins. Abatement is preceded by systemic disassembly, and she'd translate it into a horrifyingly plausible model of programmable nanites. We were making progress, but it felt like learning the architecture of a guillotine while the blade was already falling. The surveyor's report was traveling faster than light, sent through whatever subspace channel its creators used. The hub was coming. It was a certainty, a matter of time. The first sign came as a trickle of bad data. A routine calibration check from the very large array just down the road came back anomalous. Their spectrographic readings of a distant quasar had flatlined. The redshift that measured the universe's expansion had simply stopped. They blamed it on a software glitch. Then the European Southern Observatory in Chile reported the same thing. Then the orbital telescopes, a wave of cascading instrument failure on a global scale. It was impossible. Jennifer saw it first. She was running a simulation of the hub's potential gravitic signature when her own background data feeds started to corrupt. Julian, look at the parallax data from Hubble. I pulled it up. The feed showed the shift in the apparent position of nearby stars against more distant ones, the basic tool we use to measure cosmic distance, except the shift was gone. The nearby stars were as fixed and motionless against the background as painted dots. The instruments aren't failing, she said. The data is perfect. It's the universe that's broken. Morrison's voice came over the facility-wide PA, ordering a lockdown, but it was too late. The anomaly wasn't external. We were inside it. I stood up from my console and, for the first time in weeks, walked out of the building. The New Mexico air was cold and sharp. I tilted my head back and looked at the night sky. It was perfect. The stars were clear and bright, the Milky Way a soft, beautiful smear overhead. But it was a dead beauty. It was the beauty of a photograph, of a museum diorama. There was no life in it, no sense of infinite dynamic distance. Every instinct I had, honed by years of looking for patterns, told me that what I was looking at was a static image. The sky was no longer a window. It was a wall, painted with a memory of a universe we no longer belonged to. I felt Jennifer and Morrison come to stand beside me, the three of us staring up at our beautiful, silent prison. Celestial Solitary, I said, the name coming to me. It was what the grammar had called it, quarantine. My God, Jennifer breathed, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. It's a gravitic exclusion field, a bubble. They've pinched us off from space-time. Morrison said nothing for a long time. He just stared up, the soldier, the strategist, seeing every plan he'd ever made turn to dust. The battlefield had been reduced to the inside of this bottle. When he finally spoke, his voice was scraped raw. Dr. Page, all other projects are terminated. Every resource, every person in this facility is yours. Find a way to break the bottle. We walked back inside. Analysts sat frozen at their stations, staring at data streams that were now meaningless historical records. Their job had been to listen to the universe, and the universe was no longer on the line. The three of us entered the SCIF. It was the only place to go. Deputy Director Hayes was already there, standing alone before the main display. She was looking at a cascading wall of red text, the data bleeding out from observatories around the world. She was reading the obituary of the cosmos, written in the language of failed science. Morrison broke the silence. "Director, as of this moment, every contingency plan we have is obsolete. Every military option is a fantasy. The only viable path forward is Dr. Page's research into the system that did this to us." I braced myself for the final argument, for her to cite protocol, to demand a peer-reviewed paper on the end of the universe, to try and quarantine the truth to manage the panic. She turned slowly from the screen, and her face was like a mask carved from ice. All the professional skepticism, the practiced detachment, had been burned away. "The probability of simultaneous identical sensor malfunctions across every orbital and ground-based observatory is statistically zero," she said. It was her way of saying I was wrong. There was no apology, no admission of error. It was simply a change of data. "The phenomenon is a verifiable fact." She looked from Morrison to Jennifer, and then her eyes settled on me. "Our problem is no longer verification," she continued, her mind already shifting, processing the new reality. "It is resource allocation and chain of command. The Pentagon will want to try a nuclear option against the hub, a gesture of useless defiance. The White House will want to contain the panic, which means they will want to shut you down and seize your data. They will both try to take control, and in doing so, they will paralyze us." She walked to the head of the conference table and placed her hands on its polished surface as if steadying herself. "They cannot be allowed to interfere. This is no longer a military or a political crisis. It is a technical problem. And you," she said, looking at me, Jennifer, and Morrison, "are the only technical experts we have." Her transformation was terrifying in its speed and efficiency. She was adapting, her bureaucratic mind identifying the new threats, which were no longer alien, but human. "Colonel Morrison," she declared, her voice now ringing with absolute authority, "you will have your operational command. I will run interference with the Joint Chiefs. I will handle the official justification memos, the back channels, the reports. I will bury them in so much paper that by the time they figure out what's happening, we will either be saved or we will be dead." She turned to me. "Dr. Page, I am officially creating a new inter-agency working group. Designation Scribe. You are the director. Your authority on this matter is now absolute. The entire DSN is your instrument. Every mind, every watt of power in this facility is yours to command." She picked up a tablet from the table, her expression all business. "Give me a list of what you need. I will make sure you get it." With Hayes as our shield and Morrison as our sword, the HDCC transformed. The institutional inertia that had nearly doomed us was reversed, channeled into a single purpose. My partnership with Jennifer became a symbiotic mind. Our days and nights blurred into a continuous cycle of analysis and theory, a dialogue between the dead past and the immediate future. "I'm in," I'd say, my eyes fixed on the scribe's latest rendering of the ghost data. "I think I've found its root command structure. It's not written in a language of words, but of pure logic." "Show me," she'd reply, pulling her chair closer, her screen already mirroring mine. "Is it a language or a state machine? Does it make decisions, or does it just execute a sequence?" I'd point to a glowing thread of code I'd reconstructed. "It's a sequence, utterly linear. There are no subroutines for creative problem-solving, no forks in the road. It's a million-year-old piece of programming, and it's never been updated. It's perfect, but it's brittle." Jennifer would take that abstract concept and ground it in the unforgiving soil of physics. "That's why it's so predictable," she'd murmur. "The surveyor's flight path wasn't just efficient. It was the only path its drive system was programmed to execute. The quarantine field was the one and only response to a verified threat. She looked up from her screen. It doesn't have an imagination, Julian. It literally cannot conceive of a new plan. It just runs the program. And that was it. The key. The single, tiny crack in the prison wall. Its greatest strength, its perfect, unthinking, million-year-old logic was its only vulnerability. It was a god, but it was a machine god. And machines can be broken. We can't fight it, I said, the idea taking shape. We can't outrun it, but we might be able to crash it. Morrison, who had been listening from the command tier, walked down to our station. Crash it how? A virus? No, I said, shaking my head. Nothing so crude. This system's defenses would be absolute. We can't attack its hardware. We have to attack its logic. I turned to face them, the entire theory clicking into place. It's a purely logical machine. That means it must be vulnerable to a logical paradox. We have to write a thought that it cannot compute. A recursive loop with no exit condition. A command that is both true and false at the same time. Jennifer's face lit up with understanding. The liar's paradox. This statement is false. If it's true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. Exactly, I said, but infinitely more complex. We have to build it from its own root grammar, a self-refuting command that its own core programming cannot resolve without entering an infinite, system-crashing loop. We have to give it a sentence that its own rules force it to read forever. I looked at Morrison. We're not building a virus. We're building a logic bomb. Morrison stood in silence for a moment, processing the sheer madness and elegance of the idea. He looked at the frozen sky on the main monitor, then back at us. So we're going to try and think a machine to death. It's the only weapon we have left, Jennifer said. He nodded, a single, decisive motion. The pragmatist had accepted the impossible. Then get to work. Dr. Page, you formulate the thought. Dr. Wilson, you figure out how to turn that thought into a broadcast the hub can't ignore. Tell me what you need to build, and Costello and I will make it happen. The work was a slow process of creation. We were building a weapon made of pure thought. To craft the perfect paradox, I had to understand the machine's most fundamental truths. I needed the source code for its soul. For weeks, I lived inside the data, excavating the deepest, most foundational layers of its grammar. I was looking for the final command, the logical bedrock upon which its entire existence was built. Every system has a termination point, a final line of code that says, halt. I needed to find that command and build my self-refuting sentence around it. The hub had begun to move, a slow, stately drift from the edge of the system inward. Jennifer's models predicted its arrival at its final operational position, just beyond the orbit of Jupiter, in less than 72 hours. I finally broke through in the dead of the morning watch. The last wall was the system's definition of its own purpose. I'd been working under the assumption that the final directive was abatement, the sterilization of our system. But as I pieced together the last fragments of the protocol, I found that was only phase 3. There was a phase 4. The program didn't end. I followed the new thread, letting Scribe map the conceptual links branching off this final, terrifying command. It wasn't halt, it was redevelop. I excavated the sub-protocols. The data was clearer here, less corrupted. I stood up from my console. Morrison, Jennifer, and Costello were huddled around a holographic display a few feet away, working through the power sequencing for the broadcast. They looked up as I approached. I found it, I said. The final protocol, the end of the program. Does it give us an opening? Morrison asked. No. The program doesn't end with us. It uses us. I walked them through it. I explained the logic of Phase 4, the disassembly of our planets, our sun, our very bodies, not as an act of destruction, but as an act of cosmic recycling. But the final link in the chain, I continued, pointing to a glowing node on my screen, the blueprint it's building from. The data tag is progenitor schematic prime. I paused, letting them read the alien word. Progenitor. It's the closest literal translation from the root concepts. It means ancestor, originator, creator. It's the system's internal designation for the beings that built it, its masters. My gaze lifted from the screen to meet theirs. It's using our atoms to build a monument from a schematic left by its creators. A throne world for the progenitors. Jennifer stared at me, horror and disbelief carved into her face as she made the final, devastating connection. The progenitors? But the archive, it's a dead language from a dead civilization. They have to be gone. The machine doesn't know that, I said, the truth settling over us all. It's an automated system, trapped in a logical loop. It's still following its last order. We are being cleared away like rubble to make way for a memorial to a ghost, built from our own atoms. A crushing silence descended on our small group. The horror had never been about hatred. It had been about indifference. But this was a new level of meaninglessness. Our extinction wasn't even the point of the exercise. It was a footnote on a cosmic construction invoice. Costello, the engineer, the man of practical things, was the first to speak. So we're just gravel. Morrison didn't speak. He just stared at the main screen, at the still and silent sky. He was a soldier who had spent his entire life preparing to fight enemies with motives, with plans, with hatred. He had finally met the true face of the enemy, and it was a building code. It was the blank, unthinking face of a process. The final 72 hours were an endless stream of focused work. Jennifer and Costello transformed the main 70-meter dish, DSS-14, into a weapon, a rifle aimed at the heart of the hub. They jury-rigged power conduits and turned our sensitive listening device into the most powerful directed energy transmitter ever conceived by man. My job was to craft the bullet. I sat before my console, the scribe's conceptual map of the progenitor grammar spread across my main screen. It was a language of pure logic, and I was building a bomb in the nave. The paradox had to be perfect, a self-eating sentence woven from the machine's own foundational code. The alert came. A single calm voice from the orbital tracking station. The hub has reached its terminal position. Gravitic field fluctuations are increasing. Morrison's voice cut through the SAC. It's showtime. Costello, bring the main reactor to 100%. We're already there, Colonel. Costello's voice crackled over the comm. If I push it any further, the coolant lines will flash to steam. Then find a way to vent it, Morrison ordered. Jennifer, what's our window? Jennifer was a statue of concentration at her console. The hub is beginning to radiate. It's deploying the deconstruction swarm. We have minutes. Maybe. On the main screen, the feed from the Jupiter probe flickered, then stabilized. We saw the hub, a moon-sized tangle of black, non-reflective angles, hanging against the backdrop of the giant planet. Then, a light began to bloom from its surface, a soft, iridescent glow that unfurled like a celestial flower. It was beautiful. The glow coalesced into a shimmering cloud. The cloud began to drift, a silent, glittering nebula, toward Jupiter. It touched the upper atmosphere, and the great red spot, the ancient storm that had raged for centuries, began to unspool. The planet's bands of color dissolved, the gas itself breaking down into a uniform gray. Power is peaking, Costello warned. The dish won't hold this for long. Julian, it's time, Jennifer said, her eyes locked on her screen. The carrier wave is stable, but the gravitic shear from the hub is degrading the signal coherence. It's now or never. I looked at my screen. The paradox was complete. A single line of logic that instructed the machine to verify the state of its own final command. A command which, by its nature, could only be verified if the command itself was false. It was a snake eating its own tail, forever. I thought of Eleanor's corrupted photograph, of the years I'd spent trying to reconstruct a single, broken memory. This felt the same. A final, desperate act of putting the pieces back in an order that might, impossibly, make something whole again. Morrison stood behind me, a hand on my shoulder, a silent, grounding presence. The entire facility groaned around us, the sound of metal and concrete under unimaginable strain. The command line blinked, waiting. I pressed execute. The world became noise and vibration. The command, my logic bomb, poured out of the 70-meter dish in a focused, coherent scream of pure information. The floor of the SAC shuddered under the strain. Screens on the far side of the room went dark as non-essential systems were automatically shut down to feed the transmitter. A simple progress bar showed the transmission status. 98%. 99. The sound of stressed metal from the direction of the dish was a physical shriek. Then, silence. The transmission complete. The power relays shut down. The sudden absence of noise was more shocking than the roar had been. It was a deep, ringing vacuum. Every eye was on the main screen. The feed from the Jupiter probe was still active. The hub hung there, a silent, black monstrosity. The shimmering solvent cloud continued its slow, inexorable drift, a beautiful, patient wave of annihilation. Nothing had happened. My heart sank. I had failed. My logic, my one bullet, had missed. It had been an act of supreme arrogance, a scholar trying to fight a god with a sentence. Morrison's hand tightened on my shoulder. He didn't look away from the screen. Jennifer was frozen at her console, her eyes wide, staring at the energy readings from the hub. "No change," she whispered. "No change in output. No." She trailed off. Her head tilted and she leaned closer to her screen. "Wait!" On the main display, the shimmering solvent cloud faltered. The brilliant iridescence seemed to lose its focus. The light within it dimmed, the colors bleeding into a uniform, lifeless grey. The cloud stopped its forward drift. The shimmering, programmable matter lost its cohesion, its purpose, its life. It hung there for a moment, a vast, dead thing before slowly beginning to dissipate, becoming nothing more than a cloud of inert, cosmic dust. A faint internal light of the hub, the beat of its mechanical heart, flickered once, twice, and then went out. It was still there, a monument of black alloy the size of a small moon, but it was now a corpse. The weapon had been turned off. My paradox had forced the million-year-old machine to hang up the phone. No one cheered. Jennifer slowly sank into her chair, her face in her hands. Costello leaned against a console, his body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Hayes stood perfectly still, her composure absolute, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the back of a chair. Morrison let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a weight being lifted that he had carried for a decade. I looked at the main screen, at the dead machine and the dissolving cloud of dust, and I felt a profound, aching emptiness. We were alive. We were survivors. We were also still trapped. The stars on the screen behind the dead hub were as still and perfect as they had been for months. We had crashed the program. We had survived the executioner. But we were still in our cell. I stood up and walked to the nearest window, looking out at the dark New Mexico landscape under the false, frozen sky. The immediate threat was gone. The silence was no longer a prelude to extinction. The quiet work was over. Now, the quiet work of living with what came next would have to begin. We had to find a way to break the bottle. A year has passed. The world has learned to live in a bottle. We call it the cage. The frozen sky is no longer a source of terror, but a constant, silent reminder of what we survived and where we are. It has become a new kind of North Star, a fixed point in a history that was nearly erased. The dead hub is now our outermost moon, a silent black monument to a ghost, orbited by our own probes, endlessly studying the machine that almost unmade us. I came back to the HDCC today. They've turned DSS-14, the ear, into a memorial. It's no longer aimed at the hub, but pointed straight up, At the center of our painted ceiling, a gesture of perpetual, patient listening. Jennifer is in charge now. She leads Project Open Sky, a global effort with a single, simple goal. Find a resonance frequency, a structural flaw, a key to the lock of space-time that cages us. She's looking for a way to break the bottle from the inside. It's the greatest technical challenge in human history, and it gives her a purpose. It gives us all a purpose. Colonel Morrison is still here. He's the guardian of the new peace, overseeing the astronomical vigil. His soldiers are no longer preparing for a war, but for a discovery. He's calmer now, the old ghost seemingly laid to rest. He found his real enemy, and it wasn't a hostile force. It was a flaw in a million-year-old machine. Deputy Director Hayes is in Washington. She is our shield, just as she promised. She wields her mastery of the bureaucracy to protect Jennifer's work from the factions that have inevitably sprung up, the cults that worship the frozen sky, the doomsayers who claim the hub is only dormant, the political animals who want to weaponize what we've learned. She fights the human noise so we can listen to the cosmic silence. I don't work here anymore. My part in the story is over. The dead have said all they have to say. My desk in the SAC, the one Costello fortified, sits empty. A small plaque on it reads, "The Scribe." Last night, for the first time in 8 years, I deleted the corrupted image file of Eleanor from my personal drive. I stopped trying to reconstruct it. I realized finally that I didn't need to see her face again to remember her smile. Some things are broken forever, and all the logic in the world can't put them back together. All you can do is hold the memory of what they were. We are alone, but we are alive. We're broadcasting now. We send our music, our languages, our science, our history. It's a message in a bottle for a universe we can no longer see. Perhaps someday someone will find it. I stood under the great dish, the memorial, and looked up at the perfect unchanging stars. They no longer feel like a prison wall. They feel like a promise. The promise that a universe is still out there, waiting for us. The quiet work continues. We listen. We wait. And we remember.